The abandoned Toyota Camry sat empty on Route 8 near Waterbury, Connecticut, with the windshield wipers still sweeping back and forth against the October rain. Eliza Thornton's purse remained on the passenger seat, her college textbooks scattered across the back, but the 20-year-old nursing student was nowhere to be found. The final call from her cell phone at 10:47 p.m. was to her roommate. "There's a dark truck behind me that won't back off." That rainy night in 2000, Eliza vanished without a trace, and with her disappeared the truth that would haunt a small Connecticut town for 2 decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. October 12, 2000 was unusually cold and wet in Waterbury, Connecticut. The autumn leaves were at their peak, transforming the rolling hills into a canvas of crimson and gold. But that Thursday night, heavy rain washed the colors away, leaving only darkness and the steady drumming of water on rooftops. At the University of Connecticut's Waterbury campus, students were hurrying to their cars after evening classes, pulling jackets over their heads against the downpour. Among them was Eliza Thornton, a 20-year-old sophomore with warm brown eyes and an easy smile that put her nursing patients at ease. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail as she dashed through the parking lot, clutching her green canvas backpack filled with medical textbooks. She was known for her compassion and determination, the first in her family to attend college, working part-time at the local hospital to pay her tuition. That night, Eliza had stayed late at the library, finishing a paper on patient care ethics. Security camera footage would later show her walking to her car at 10:23 p.m., talking briefly with her classmate, Michael Reynolds, before they parted ways in the parking lot. Michael, 22, a pre-med student with a reputation for being brilliant but reserved, would be the last known person to see Eliza alive. At 10:30 p.m., Eliza called her roommate, Jamie Foster, saying she was heading home and would stop at the 24-hour pharmacy to pick up cold medicine for Jamie's lingering cough. The drive from campus to their shared apartment normally took 20 minutes along Route 8, a winding road that cut through dense woodland and small towns. But Eliza never made it home that night. At 10:47 p.m., Jamie received another call from Eliza. The connection was poor, broken by static and the sound of heavy rain. But Jamie clearly heard the tension in Eliza's voice. "There's a dark truck behind me that won't back off." Then the line went dead. Jamie immediately tried calling back, but the call went straight to voicemail. By midnight, Jamie was pacing their small apartment, dialing Eliza's number repeatedly while peering anxiously through the blinds at the empty parking spaces below. She called their mutual friends, then local hospitals, and finally, at 1:30 a.m., she called the Waterbury Police Department to report Eliza missing. The responding officer, Detective Robert Collins, listened to Jamie's concerns with thinly veiled skepticism. "College students go off-grid all the time," he said, jotting minimal notes in his pad. "She probably met up with friends or a boyfriend. Wait until morning, she'll turn up." Jamie clutched Eliza's photo, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. She would never just disappear. She has an early clinical rotation tomorrow. Her patients depend on her." Detective Collins reluctantly took the report, but assured Jamie that most missing persons return within 24 hours. He promised to look into it if she doesn't show up tomorrow. His casual dismissal would later become the first link in a chain of investigative failures that would haunt the case for years to come. Dawn broke over Waterbury with clearing skies, but no sign of Eliza. Jamie hadn't slept, her eyes red-rimmed as she called Eliza's parents in the small town of Litchfield, 20 miles away. Catherine and William Thornton arrived within the hour, their faces etched with worry that would only deepen in the coming days. At 7:15 a.m., a highway patrol officer spotted a blue Toyota Camry on the shoulder of Route 8, about 8 miles from campus. The car was unlocked, the driver's door slightly ajar, windshield wipers still moving back and forth across the dry glass. Inside was Eliza's purse, her wallet with $43 intact, and her cell phone plugged into the charger. On the passenger seat lay a pharmacy receipt, time-stamped 10:39 p.m., showing she had purchased cold medicine as promised. When the responding officers ran the license plate, the missing persons report, filed just hours earlier, appeared in their system. Within minutes, Route 8 was transformed from a quiet morning commute route into a crime scene. Yellow tape cordoned off the area as forensic technicians photographed the vehicle and the surrounding woods. Inside the car, investigators found a single unusual detail. The rearview mirror had been adjusted to an extreme angle, as if Eliza had been trying to keep something specific in view. On the driver's side window was a partial handprint, smudged but visible against the glass. In the back seat, her textbooks were scattered as if thrown about during a struggle. By noon, more than 50 officers from Waterbury and surrounding departments had gathered for a search briefing. Police dogs were brought in, their leashes taut as they sniffed the damp ground around the abandoned car. Volunteers from the university and local community arrived in hiking boots and rain jackets, ready to comb the dense woods that flanked both sides of the highway. Catherine Thornton stood near the police tape, clutching her husband's arm, her face pale as she watched the search teams disappear into the trees. "My daughter is still out there," she whispered. "She's waiting for us to find her." William Thornton, a former Army sergeant with a stoic demeanor, approached Detective Collins with military precision. "I want to know exactly what resources are being dedicated to finding my daughter," he demanded, his voice steady, but his knuckles white at his sides. "And I want to know why this wasn't taken seriously when her roommate first reported it." The detective's assurances rang hollow, as the first day of searching yielded nothing but a single earring. Found in the grass near the driver's side door, a small silver crescent moon that Catherine confirmed belonged to Eliza. The tiny piece of jewelry became the only trace of the missing student, a silent witness to whatever had transpired on that rainy night. As the search continued, rumors began to circulate through the community. A truck driver reported seeing a dark pickup following closely behind a small sedan on Route 8 the night before, around the time of Eliza's disappearance. The witness described the truck as a black Ford F-150 with tinted windows and a dented rear bumper. He didn't get the license plate, but remembered thinking the truck was driving aggressively, too close to the car ahead in the poor weather conditions. This potential lead energized investigators, who began canvassing local businesses and residences along Route 8 for security footage. At a gas station 2 miles from where Eliza's car was found, grainy surveillance video captured a dark pickup truck matching the description. But the camera angle and rain-streaked image made it impossible to identify the driver or license plate. By the end of the first week, the search had expanded to include dive teams checking the Naugatuck River and helicopters scanning the dense New England forest. Eliza's face appeared on flyers throughout Connecticut, her warm smile and kind eyes staring out from telephone poles and store windows. Local news covered the story extensively, with headlines asking, "Where is Eliza Thornton?" The initial investigation focused on Michael Reynolds, the classmate who was last seen speaking with Eliza in the parking lot. Michael cooperated fully, providing his whereabouts for the entire evening. Security footage from his apartment complex confirmed he arrived home at 10:45 p.m., making it physically impossible for him to be involved in Eliza's disappearance. His alibi was solid, and investigators reluctantly crossed him off their suspect list. As weeks turned into months, the active search dwindled. Fewer officers were assigned to the case, and media attention waned. But for the Thornton family, the nightmare continued unabated. Catherine quit her job as an elementary school teacher to devote herself full-time to finding her daughter, creating a foundation called Find Eliza that raised funds for private investigators and organized ongoing volunteer searches. William Thornton, previously a man of few words, became the voice of the family in press conferences, his military bearing giving weight to his increasingly desperate pleas for information. "Someone knows what happened to our daughter," he would say, looking directly into the camera. "We're not giving up, not ever. December brought the first significant break in the case when a hiker found a green canvas backpack partially buried under leaves in a ravine 3 miles from where Eliza's car was discovered. Inside were Eliza's student ID, class notes, and a novel with a bookmark still placed midway through, all confirming it belonged to the missing student. The backpack showed signs of having been exposed to the elements for weeks, but forensic analysis revealed something more. Troubling, traces of motor oil on the outer fabric, suggesting it had been in contact with a vehicle or mechanical equipment. This evidence reinvigorated the investigation briefly. Police theorized that Eliza might have been forced off the road by the dark truck, then abducted. The backpack could have been tossed from a vehicle or dropped during a struggle. However, despite the new evidence, the case once again grew cold as winter settled over Connecticut. Jamie Foster, unable to bear living in the apartment she had shared with Eliza, moved out before Christmas. "Every time I hear footsteps in the hallway, I think it's her coming home," she told reporters, her voice breaking. "But she's never coming home, is she?" In February 2001, the case took an unexpected turn when an anonymous letter arrived at the Waterbury Police Department. Written in block letters on plain paper, it contained 6 words: "Look for the truck driver's helper." Investigators were puzzled by the cryptic message. What truck driver? What helper? The letter contained no further details, no signature, and forensic analysis revealed only that it had been written on commonly available paper with a standard ballpoint pen. The envelope bore a Hartford postmark, but provided no further clues to its sender. Detective Collins, now feeling the weight of the stalled investigation, arranged for the letter to be published in local newspapers, hoping it might prompt someone to come forward with information. The response was a flurry of tips, most leading nowhere, but one stood out. A waitress at a truck stop diner on Route 8 recalled a regular customer, a long-haul trucker who often brought along a younger man he introduced as his assistant or helper. She described the trucker as an older man, around 50, with a grey beard and a distinctive scar across his right cheek. The helper was younger, perhaps in his 30s, with dark hair and an intense stare that had always made her uncomfortable. Most notably, they drove a dark Ford pickup, not a semi-truck, which she found odd for someone who claimed to be a long-haul driver. The waitress hadn't seen the pair since October of the previous year, right around the time of Eliza's disappearance. When shown a photo lineup, she couldn't positively identify anyone, but her description was detailed enough to warrant further investigation. Police began searching records of trucking companies operating in the area, cross-referencing driver descriptions with the waitress's account. They also reviewed traffic camera footage from the months before and after Eliza's disappearance, looking for the dark pickup. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Despite these efforts, the trucker and his helper remained phantoms, mentioned in whispers, but never materializing in evidence solid enough to pursue. The lead, like many before it, gradually faded into the growing file of dead ends. By the 1-year anniversary of Eliza's disappearance, the case had been officially classified as cold. The Thornton family held a candlelight vigil on Route 8, near where Eliza's car had been found. Hundreds attended, holding flames against the October darkness, their faces solemn as William Thornton spoke about his daughter. "Eliza would have graduated from nursing school next year," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "She would have helped countless patients, brought comfort to the suffering. Someone has stolen that future, not just from Eliza, but from everyone she would have touched with her compassion." Among those attending the vigil was Jamie Foster, who had transferred to a university in Boston but returned for the memorial. Also present was Detective Collins, standing at the back of the crowd, his face lined with the frustration of an unsolved case that had come to define his career. As the years passed, the Find Eliza Foundation continued its work, offering scholarships to nursing students and funding for missing persons investigations across New England. Catherine Thornton became a recognized advocate for families of the missing, testifying before the state legislature to improve protocols for missing persons cases and securing the passage of Eliza's Law in 2005, which mandated immediate response to missing adults reports where suspicious circumstances existed. In 2007, the case briefly resurfaced when a construction worker unearthed a woman's shoe while excavating for a new shopping center 10 miles from Route 8. For a few tense days, the Thornton family held their breath, but forensic testing confirmed the shoe had been buried long before Eliza's disappearance and belonged to someone else entirely. By 2010, the original investigators had largely moved on, retired, reassigned, or promoted. Detective Collins, now a captain overseeing the department's cold case unit, kept Eliza's file on his desk, a constant reminder of the case he couldn't solve. Each year on October 12th, he would review the evidence, hoping fresh eyes might catch something previously overlooked. It was during one such review in 2013 that Collins noticed something in the original. Photos of Eliza's car, a small reflection in the rearview mirror that had been dismissed as a camera flash or water droplet, using enhanced digital technology unavailable in 2000. The department's new forensic technician was able to clarify the image enough to determine it was actually a partial reflection of a license plate. Only 3 characters were visible, 7AF. This tiny lead sent investigators back to vehicle registration records from 2000, cross-referencing partial plates with dark Ford F-150 pickups registered in Connecticut. The list was still too long to be useful, but when combined with other parameters, trucks owned by men matching the diner waitress's description, it narrowed to 27 possibilities. Meanwhile, the original evidence was being re-examined using modern forensic techniques. The partial handprint on Eliza's car window, previously unmatched to any suspect, was run through updated databases. The backpack, preserved in evidence storage, underwent new testing that revealed additional trace evidence, tiny metal shavings consistent with those found in auto repair shops. In 2015, another anonymous tip arrived, this time a voice message left on the Find Eliza Foundation's hotline. It checked the mechanic who worked at Porter's garage in Torrington around 2000, the one with the scar. Torrington, just 15 miles from where Eliza's car was found, had been within the scope of the original investigation, but Porter's garage had closed in 2003, its records scattered or destroyed. The new cold case team, led by Detective Sarah Martinez, began the painstaking process of tracking down former employees. They discovered that in 2000, Porter's garage had employed a mechanic named Victor Blackwood, a man in his 50s with a scar on his right cheek, matching the description of the trucker from the diner. Blackwood had left the garage abruptly in November 2000, just weeks after Eliza's disappearance, claiming he was moving to Florida to care for an ailing relative. Further investigation revealed that Blackwood had indeed moved south, but not to Florida, to Georgia, where he had been working at various auto repair shops ever since. More crucially, records showed he had owned a black Ford F-150 in 2000, with the license plate that included the characters 7AF. Detective Martinez also discovered that Blackwood had not worked alone. He had a nephew, Robert Blackwood, who occasionally assisted at the garage, a man now in his late 40s who had a history of stalking complaints from female college students in the Waterbury area in the late 1990s. Though no charges had ever been filed, in March 2018, armed with this new information and a warrant, Connecticut State Police traveled to Savannah, Georgia, where they found Victor Blackwood working as a mechanic at a small independent garage. When questioned about Eliza Thornton, Blackwood initially denied any knowledge of the case, claiming he had never heard of the missing student. However, when presented with the evidence linking his truck to the scene and confronted with questions about his sudden departure from Connecticut, his demeanor changed. He requested a lawyer and refused to answer further questions. Robert Blackwood proved more difficult to locate. He had moved frequently over the years, leaving a trail of short-term jobs and rental addresses across the southeast. Eventually, investigators tracked him to a small apartment in Charleston, South Carolina, where he was working as a night security guard at a warehouse. During questioning, Robert Blackwood maintained his innocence, insisting he had left Connecticut in early 2001 to start fresh and knew nothing about any missing girl. However, when detectives executed a search warrant on his apartment, they made a disturbing discovery. Hidden in a locked box under his bed was a silver crescent moon earring, the match to the one found near Eliza's abandoned car 18 years earlier. In September 2019, nearly 19 years after Eliza Thornton disappeared, both Victor and Robert Blackwood were extradited to Connecticut to face charges. The evidence against them, while circumstantial, was compelling. The matching earring, the truck with the partial plate match, their hasty departure from the area, and Robert's history of stalking female students. But the most damning evidence came from modern forensic analysis of the backpack. Using advanced DNA extraction techniques unavailable in 2000, technicians were able to isolate skin cells from the backpack's strap, cells that provided a partial DNA profile matching Robert Blackwood. As the arrests made headlines across Connecticut, the Thornton family faced the news with a complex mixture of relief and renewed grief. "We've waited almost 20 years to know what happened to our daughter," Catherine Thornton told reporters, her hair now silver, but her determination undiminished. This is just the first step toward justice for Eliza. With the arrests of Victor and Robert Blackwood, the small Connecticut town of Waterbury was thrust back in time to October 2000. Faded "Find Eliza" posters, long ignored as part of the landscape, suddenly became relevant again. Local news channels interrupted regular programming with breaking updates, and courthouse steps filled with reporters from across New England. For Detective Sarah Martinez, the case that had haunted her predecessors was now hers to carry to conclusion. In her office at the Waterbury Police Department, she meticulously arranged the evidence against the Blackwoods, photographs of the silver earring found in Robert's apartment, DNA reports, witness statements from the diner waitress, and license plate records for Victor's black Ford F-150. "We have enough for an indictment," she told Captain Collins, who had postponed his retirement to see the case through. "But for a conviction, especially after so much time has passed, we need more. We need to find Eliza." The search for Eliza Thornton's remains began anew in April 2020, focusing on areas connected to the Blackwoods. Teams combed the woods surrounding Porter's garage in Torrington, where Victor had worked in 2000. They searched abandoned properties along trucking routes and excavated behind a former rental house where Robert had lived around the time of the disappearance. For 3 grueling weeks, search teams battled spring rains and difficult terrain. Dogs trained to detect human remains zigzagged through underbrush, while ground-penetrating radar scanned for disturbances beneath the soil. The Thornton family watched each day, hope and dread intertwined, as they waited for news. On May 12, 2020, nearly 20 years after Eliza vanished, a cadaver dog alerted handlers to an area deep in the woods behind a shuttered truck stop, 15 miles north of where her car had been found. The location was significant. Records showed Victor Blackwood had occasionally worked there, repairing fleet vehicles in the late 1990s, giving him intimate knowledge of the surroundings. Forensic teams cordoned off the area, working methodically in a grid pattern. 6 feet below the forest floor, partially protected by the rocky New England soil, they discovered human remains. Next to them lay a water-damaged student ID card bearing Eliza Thornton's name and smiling face. Catherine Thornton collapsed when Martinez delivered the news. 20 years of suspended grief finally finding release. William Thornton, now using a cane and showing the weight of 2 decades of searching, simply nodded, as if confirming what he had always known. "Did she suffer?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Martinez could only respond with honesty. We won't know everything until the forensic examination is complete, but it appears she died quickly. DNA testing confirmed what the family already knew in their hearts. The remains were Eliza's. Forensic anthropologists determined she had died from blunt force trauma to the skull, likely inflicted by a heavy wrench or similar tool. The medical examiner noted defensive wounds on the arm bones, indicating Eliza had fought against her attacker in her final moments. The discovery transformed the case against the Blackwoods. What had been circumstantial evidence now formed a clear picture of abduction and murder. In July 2020, the prosecutor's office formally charged both men, Victor as an accessory and Robert as the primary perpetrator. As the legal proceedings moved forward, investigators continued piecing together what happened on that rainy October night in 2000. Through cell phone records, witness statements, and finally, statements from Victor Blackwood himself as part of a plea agreement, a timeline emerged. Robert Blackwood had developed an obsession with Eliza after seeing her at the university, where he occasionally delivered parts to the maintenance department. On multiple occasions, he had followed her around campus, watching from a distance, though Eliza likely never noticed him. On October 12, 2000, Robert convinced his uncle Victor to drive along Route 8, knowing Eliza would be traveling that route home from evening classes. In the heavy rain, they followed her Toyota, eventually forcing her to pull over by aggressively tailgating and flashing their high beams. Victor later claimed they had only intended to talk to her, to give Robert a chance to introduce himself properly. But when Eliza refused to roll down her window and began calling for help on her cell phone, Robert panicked. He smashed the driver's window, struggled with Eliza as she fought back, and struck her with a wrench from Victor's truck. The older man, shocked by his nephew's violence but unwilling to abandon him, helped transport Eliza's body to the remote location near the truck stop. They buried her that same night, keeping her earring as a trophy, a detail Victor omitted from his confession, but which became clear when the matching earring was found in Robert's possession years later. After the murder, the two men separated. Victor quickly sold his truck, closed out his apartment, and fled south. Robert stayed in Connecticut for a few more months, even returning to the burial site several times before eventually moving to South Carolina. For 20 years, they had lived with their secret, never contacting each other again after 2001. The revelation of their calculated actions sent waves of horror through the community. How could such predators have lived among them, worked alongside them, and vanished so easily? The case exposed critical gaps in the original investigation, reports of Robert's stalking behavior that were never fully investigated, a witness statement about Victor's truck that was filed but not followed up, and most painfully, the dismissive response to Jamie Foster's initial report of Eliza's disappearance. In October 2020, exactly 20 years after Eliza disappeared, Victor Blackwood's plea deal was finalized. In exchange for his testimony against his nephew and the information that led to Eliza's remains, he received a sentence of 15 years for accessory to murder. His testimony would prove crucial in the case against Robert, who maintained his innocence despite the mounting evidence. Robert Blackwood's trial began in February 2021. The courthouse in Waterbury was packed with media, community members, and the families whose lives had been forever altered by the events of that rainy night. Catherine and William Thornton sat in the front row each day, their dignity and resilience moving even hardened courtroom veterans. Prosecutor Megan Chen opened with a powerful statement. For 20 years, Eliza Thornton lay alone in the cold ground while her killer walked free. For 20 years, her parents went to sleep each night, not knowing what happened to their daughter. Today, we begin the process of answering those questions and delivering the justice that has been 2 decades delayed. The prosecution built a methodical case. Forensic experts explained how modern DNA techniques extracted Robert's genetic material from the backpack strap. Automotive specialists testified that the metal shavings found on the backpack matched those common in Porter's garage, where both Blackwoods had worked. Victor took the stand, his face gaunt from prison, and detailed the events of October 12, 2000, describing his nephew's obsession and the brutal attack. Perhaps most damning was the testimony of 3 women who came forward after the arrests were publicized. Each described being followed by Robert between 1998 and 2000 near the university campus. One had even filed a police report that had been largely ignored, a painful reminder of how differently things might have ended if earlier warnings had been heeded. The defense attorney, fighting an uphill battle against overwhelming evidence, attempted to portray Victor as the true killer, claiming he had implicated his nephew to secure a lighter sentence. But this strategy crumbled when faced with the physical evidence, Robert's DNA on the backpack, the matching earring in his possession, and cell phone records placing him near Route 8 on the night of Eliza's disappearance. Jamie Foster, now a nurse practitioner with children of her own, took the stand on the trial's 4th day. Her voice shaking with emotion, she recounted her final conversation with her roommate and friend. "Eliza was scared," Jamie testified. "I heard it in her voice when she said a truck was following her. That was the last time anyone heard from her, except for the men in that truck." Throughout the proceedings, Robert Blackwood sat impassively, rarely making eye contact with witnesses or the jury. His only visible reaction came when the silver crescent moon earring was placed into evidence, his fingers twitching slightly, as if reaching for it. After 7 days of testimony and evidence presentation, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. As the verdict was read, Catherine Thornton wept quietly, her husband's arm around her shoulders. After 2 decades of uncertainty and pain, they finally had the truth about what happened to their daughter and the knowledge that her killer would face justice. At the sentencing hearing in April 2021, William Thornton addressed the court, his voice strong despite his frail appearance. 20 years ago, a predator took our daughter from us. For 20 years, we have carried the weight of not knowing, of imagining the worst, of missing the life she should have had. No parent should endure what we have endured." He looked directly at Robert Blackwood. "You stole not just Eliza's life, but the lives of everyone who loved her. You stole the patients she would have cared for, the family she might have had, the good she would have done in this world. We will never forgive you, but today we can begin to close this chapter." Judge Eleanor Simmons sentenced Robert Blackwood to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The heinous nature of this crime, the calculated stalking and abduction of a young woman, and the 2 decades of silence afterward leave no room for leniency, she stated. The defendant has shown no remorse, no recognition of the devastation he has caused, and no regard for the sanctity of human life. As Robert was led away in handcuffs, a chapter of Connecticut criminal history closed. But for those who had lived through it, the impact of the case would continue to reverberate. In the aftermath of the trial, Waterbury Police Department underwent a comprehensive review of its missing persons protocols. The failures in Eliza's case, the initial dismissal of Jamie's concerns, the overlooked stalking reports, the connection to the truck that was never fully investigated, became a case study in how not to handle such investigations. Detective Martinez, working with Catherine Thornton and the Find Eliza Foundation, developed new training programs for officers responding to missing persons reports. The protocol specifically addressed how to identify high-risk disappearances, requiring immediate action, regardless of the missing person's age or apparent circumstances. Eliza's Law, passed in 2005, was strengthened with additional provisions requiring police departments to document and investigate reports of stalking and harassment, particularly in university settings. The amended legislation, sometimes called Eliza's Legacy, aimed to identify potentially dangerous individuals before their behavior escalated to violence. For Jamie Foster, the resolution of her friend's case brought both closure and renewed purpose. She established a scholarship at the University of Connecticut's nursing school in Eliza's name, ensuring that her friend's dream of helping others would continue through future generations of nurses. Eliza would have been an amazing nurse, Jamie told a group of scholarship recipients at the first awards ceremony in 2022. She had that rare combination of intelligence and compassion that can't be taught. While we can't bring her back, we can honor her by carrying forward the work she would have done. Marie, Catherine, and William Thornton found themselves adjusting to a new reality after 20 years of searching. The foundation they had built to find their daughter transitioned to helping other families of missing persons, providing resources, support, and advocacy that they had often lacked in their own journey. When Eliza first disappeared, we felt so alone, Catherine explained at a foundation event. We didn't know how to navigate the system, how to keep the investigation active, how to handle the media. Now we can guide other families through that darkness because we've walked that path ourselves. The Thorntons also worked closely with forensic anthropologists to develop better methods for locating and identifying remains in New England's challenging terrain. The lessons learned from the search for Eliza helped bring closure to several other long-term missing persons cases in the region. For Detective Collins, who had carried the weight of the unsolved case for nearly his entire career, the resolution brought a measure of peace as he finally retired in late 2021. "Some cases get under your skin," he told reporters at his retirement ceremony. "They become part of who you are. For me, that was Eliza Thornton. I only wish we could have found her sooner." Martinez, who had inherited the case and carried it to conclusion, was promoted to lead the department's expanded cold case unit. Under her leadership, the unit began systematically reviewing unsolved disappearances and murders dating back to the 1970s, applying modern forensic techniques and the lessons learned from the Thornton case. In October 2022, 2 years after Eliza's remains were found, the community gathered for a different kind of memorial. Instead of the somber candlelight vigils that had marked the anniversary of her disappearance for 2 decades, they celebrated the dedication of the Eliza Thornton Center for Missing Persons at the University of Connecticut's Waterbury campus. The center housed both academic programs, studying the investigation of missing persons cases, and practical resources for families searching for loved ones. Its walls featured stories of successful resolutions, emphasizing that even after years or decades, justice remained possible. At the dedication ceremony, William Thornton, now using a wheelchair and visibly frail, addressed the gathering. "When evil took our daughter, we had a choice," he said, his voice wavering but determined. "We could surrender to despair, or we could fight, not just for Eliza, but for every missing person whose family waits in anguish for answers." He gestured to the building behind him. "This center represents our belief that no missing person should be forgotten, no family should fight alone, and no case should be considered hopeless. Time may pass, evidence may fade, but the human desire for truth and justice remains undiminished." Catherine, standing beside her husband, added, "Eliza would have been 42 this year. She might have had children of her own by now. We can't have those years back, but we can ensure her life continues to have meaning through the work done here." The center quickly became a national resource, connecting families with investigators, forensic experts, and support networks. Its database of missing persons cases and investigation techniques was used by law enforcement agencies across the country, and its annual conference drew participants from around the world. For the people of Waterbury, the resolution of Eliza's case brought a complex mixture of relief, grief, and reflection. The community had lived for 20 years with the unsettling knowledge that one of their own had vanished without a trace. Now they grappled with the equally disturbing realization that her killers had lived among them, hidden in plain sight. Local schools incorporated lessons about personal safety and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. The university implemented enhanced security measures and awareness programs. Businesses along Route 8 improved lighting and surveillance systems. The collective trauma of Eliza's disappearance and the long wait for justice transformed into a community-wide commitment to prevention and vigilance. In May 2023, 3 years after Eliza's remains were discovered, Catherine Thornton received an unexpected letter. It came from a young woman who had been a patient in the pediatric ward, where Eliza had volunteered during her nursing studies. "I was 10 years old and terrified of hospitals," the letter read. "Eliza sat with me during treatments, holding my hand and telling me stories to distract me from the pain. She promised that when I grew up I could be anything I wanted. Because of her kindness, I decided to become a nurse myself. I graduate next month, and I wanted you to know that your daughter's compassion continues to ripple through the world, even now." Catherine shared the letter at the next foundation meeting, her voice breaking with emotion. "This is why we never gave up," she told the gathered volunteers and staff. "Not just to find justice for Eliza, but to preserve the memory of who she was, her kindness, her care for others, her potential. That lives on, even when she cannot." The case of Eliza Thornton became a landmark in Connecticut criminal justice, cited in textbooks and training materials as both a cautionary tale of investigative failures and an inspiring example of persistence yielding results. Law enforcement officers studied the initial missteps and the eventual breakthroughs, learning how seemingly minor details, a partial reflection in a mirror, trace evidence on a backpack, could prove crucial decades later. For forensic scientists, the case demonstrated the value of preserving evidence properly, even when immediate analysis yielded no results. The DNA that eventually identified Robert Blackwood had been undetectable with 2000-era technology, but became vital evidence when analyzed with modern techniques. This lesson led to new protocols for evidence storage and periodic re-examination of cold case materials. In criminal justice classrooms, students debated the ethical implications of Victor Blackwood's plea deal. Had justice been served by giving a reduced sentence to someone who had helped conceal a murder for 20 years? Or was the recovery of Eliza's remains and the conviction of her killer worth the compromise? There were no easy answers, but the discussion shaped how future prosecutors would approach similar cases. The broader impact of the case extended beyond criminal justice to how communities protect vulnerable members. College campuses across New England reviewed their security measures, implemented better reporting systems for concerning behavior, and created more robust support networks for students. The stalking behavior that had preceded Eliza's abduction became a red flag that administrators and safety officers were trained to recognize and address immediately. In June 2023, as Connecticut prepared to mark what would have been Eliza Thornton's 43rd birthday, a development emerged that would add another dimension to the already complex case. A retired truck driver named Howard Jenkins contacted the Waterbury Police Department with information he had kept secret for over 2 decades. Detective Martinez met Jenkins at his modest home in Bristol, where the 78-year-old man, his hands shaking slightly from age, recounted a story that had haunted him for years. In October 2000, Jenkins had been at the truck stop near where Eliza's remains were eventually found. Late that rainy night, he noticed a black pickup truck parked at the edge of the lot, its headlights off. 2 men were digging in the wooded area beyond. "I thought they were burying trash or maybe stolen goods," Jenkins explained, his voice heavy with regret. "I didn't want to get involved in someone else's business. It wasn't until I saw the news about that poor girl years later that I realized what I might have witnessed. When Martinez asked why he hadn't come forward earlier, Jenkins lowered his gaze. Fear at first, then shame. By the time I understood what had happened, years had passed. I convinced myself it was too late, that nothing I said would matter. But since they found her, I haven't been able to sleep. I keep seeing those men in the darkness, and I wonder if I could have stopped them, or at least helped find her sooner. Martinez recorded Jenkins' statement, adding it to the case file with mixed emotions. His testimony corroborated the timeline and location established during the trial, but also highlighted a painful truth. If Jenkins had reported what he saw that night, Eliza might have been found within days rather than decades. The information was passed to the district attorney's office, but no further charges resulted. Jenkins had not directly witnessed a crime, and both Blackwoods were already serving their sentences. Instead, his story became part of the educational materials used by the Eliza Thornton Center, a stark example of how bystander intervention might alter the course of a criminal investigation. For Catherine Thornton, Jenkins' revelation brought a fresh wave of grief. 20 years of searching, of not knowing, she told Martinez during a quiet moment at the foundation offices. And someone saw them. Someone could have led us to her all along. Her voice held no anger, only a profound sadness for the years lost to silence. Martinez, who had dedicated 3 years of her career to resolving Eliza's case, understood that each new piece of information, while valuable for the historical record, reopened wounds for the family. The case is technically closed, she explained to her team, but for the Thorntons, for Jamie Foster, for everyone who knew and loved Eliza, the impact continues to unfold. This reality became even more apparent in September 2023, when William Thornton's health declined rapidly. The years of stress and grief had taken their toll, and at 76, he was hospitalized with heart failure. From his hospital bed, he continued working on foundation matters, reviewing case files of other missing persons and offering guidance to families newly facing the nightmare he had lived for so long. Catherine rarely left his side, maintaining her strength even as her husband weakened. Together, they welcomed a steady stream of visitors, police officers who had searched for Eliza, forensic experts who had helped identify her remains, families they had supported through their own missing persons cases, and nursing students who had received scholarships in Eliza's name. On October 12, 2023, exactly 23 years after Eliza's disappearance, William Thornton passed away peacefully, holding Catherine's hand and a photo of their daughter. His funeral drew hundreds of mourners from across the state, a testament to the impact one family's persistence had made on an entire community. In his eulogy, Captain Collins, now fully retired, spoke of William's unwavering determination. He never once considered giving up the search for his daughter, Collins said, his voice thick with emotion. Even when leads dried up, when witnesses disappeared, when hope seemed foolish, William Thornton stood firm. His legacy is not just in finding justice for Eliza, but in showing all of us what it means to love without limit or condition. Catherine, dressed in black but standing tall, addressed the gathering after the service. "William and I made a promise the night Eliza disappeared," she said. "We promised we would find her no matter how long it took. We promised we would get justice for her, and we promised that her life would continue to have meaning." She looked around at the assembled mourners, many holding white roses, Eliza's favorite flower. William kept those promises. He lived to see our daughter found, to see her killer sentenced, to see her name become associated not just with tragedy, but with hope and positive change. Now it falls to me, to all of us, to continue that work. In the months following William's death, the Find Eliza Foundation, renamed the Thornton Foundation for Missing Persons, expanded its operations. Catherine moved into an office at the Eliza Thornton Center, working directly with students, researchers, and families. Her grief was evident in the silver of her hair and the lines around her eyes, but so too was her resolve to transform personal tragedy into collective purpose. The foundation established a nationwide network of volunteers trained in search techniques, evidence preservation, and family support. When a person went missing in Connecticut or surrounding states, these teams would mobilize within hours, working alongside official law enforcement, but filling the gaps that budget constraints and bureaucracy often created. In April 2024, this network faced its most significant test when 19-year-old Marcus Jenkins disappeared while hiking in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. The young man, no relation to the truck driver Howard Jenkins, had separated from his group to photograph a sunset and never returned to their campsite. Catherine personally coordinated the volunteer response, setting up a command center in a local church and organizing teams of searchers familiar with the difficult terrain. Using protocols developed through years of experience, the volunteers systematically covered areas beyond what the official search could manage. On the third day, as hope began to fade, a Foundation volunteer found Marcus's backpack wedged in a crevice near a steep drop. Search dogs were immediately brought to the area, and by nightfall, rescuers located the young man, injured but alive, at the bottom of a ravine. He had fallen, broken his leg, and been unable to climb out or signal for help. As paramedics airlifted Marcus to safety, Catherine stood watching, tears streaming down her face. Later at the hospital, Marcus's mother embraced her fiercely. "They told me to prepare for the worst," she sobbed. "But you never gave up. You found my son when others were ready to stop looking." Catherine's response was simple. 20 years ago, no one found my daughter in time. Today, we found your son. That's why we do this work. The successful rescue brought national attention to the Foundation and its methods. News programs featured interviews with Catherine, Martinez, and the volunteers who had found Marcus. Donations poured in, allowing the Foundation to expand its training programs and equipment supplies. More importantly, law enforcement agencies across New England began formally integrating the Foundation's protocols into their missing persons response plans. The Vermont State Police signed an agreement to activate Foundation volunteers immediately upon receipt of certain categories of missing persons reports, rather than waiting until official resources were exhausted. Meanwhile, the Eliza Thornton Center continued its academic work, analyzing patterns in missing persons cases and developing new approaches to investigation and recovery. Researchers there identified troubling commonalities in cases that had gone cold, dismissive initial responses from authorities, lack of immediate evidence gathering, failure to connect related incidents across jurisdictional lines. "We're finding that the first 48 hours are absolutely critical," explained Dr. Jennifer Woods, the center's research director, during a conference in Boston. "Not just in terms of finding the missing person alive, but in preserving evidence that may become crucial if the case extends into weeks, months, or even years." Eliza Thornton's case teaches us that evidence collected properly in 2000 can still yield answers in 2020. But only if we treat every missing persons report with the seriousness it deserves from the very first moment. This emphasis on immediate response and evidence preservation formed the cornerstone of Thornton Protocols, a comprehensive guide published by the Center in May 2024. The manual, distributed to police departments nationwide, detailed best practices for everything from initial interviews to search patterns to long-term case management. In July 2024, during a ceremony marking the publication of the protocols, Catherine announced a significant development. Robert Blackwood, serving his life sentence at Northern Correctional Institution, had finally agreed to a comprehensive interview about Eliza's murder. After years of denying responsibility despite the evidence and verdict, he has expressed a desire to give a complete account, Catherine explained to the assembled press. While nothing he says can bring Eliza back or undo the pain he caused, his testimony may help us understand why these crimes happen and how to prevent them in the future. The interview, conducted by Martinez and a forensic psychologist, revealed disturbing details about Robert's mindset and methods. He spoke without emotion about stalking multiple young women, about his fixation on Eliza after seeing her helping patients during his deliveries to the university hospital, and about the careful planning that went into the abduction. When asked why he had kept the earring for 20 years, Robert gave the first sign of human emotion in the entire interview, a slight smile that chilled Martinez to her core. "To remember her by," he said simply. "To keep that night with me." The interview transcript became a restricted training resource for law enforcement, helping investigators recognize patterns of predatory behavior before they escalated to violence. Though painful to read, the document provided valuable insights into preventing similar crimes. In September 2024, as the center prepared for its annual conference, an unexpected visitor arrived at Catherine's office. Jamie Foster, Eliza's former roommate, who had returned to Connecticut after accepting a position as nursing director at the same hospital where she and Eliza had once volunteered as students. The two women embraced, their friendship forged in tragedy but sustained by mutual respect and shared purpose. Jamie had brought a proposal, a specialized nursing program at the university focusing on caring for families of missing persons and homicide victims. Medical schools teach how to treat physical trauma, but not this kind of emotional devastation, Jamie explained, her passion evident as she outlined her vision. "I've seen families like yours struggle with the healthcare system while simultaneously searching for a missing loved one or coping with a violent loss. We need nurses specifically trained to support them through that journey." Catherine immediately endorsed the program, offering foundation resources to help develop the curriculum. By December 2024, the University of Connecticut had approved the specialization, with Jamie as its director and the first cohort of students set to begin the following fall. As 2025 approached, the case that had once been Connecticut's most notorious unsolved mystery had transformed into a force for positive change throughout the criminal justice and healthcare systems. The 25th anniversary of Eliza's disappearance would be marked not just with remembrance of what was lost, but celebration of what had been built in her name. In January 2025, Detective Martinez, now Captain Martinez, and head of the state's expanded cold case division, announced another milestone connected to the Thornton case. Using techniques developed during the search for Eliza, investigators had identified remains found in a remote area of Massachusetts as belonging to Sandra Mitchell, a college student who had disappeared in 1993. Without the lessons learned from Eliza Thornton's case, without the technology and methods that evolved from that investigation, Sandra might have remained unnamed forever, Martinez explained during the press conference. Now her family can finally lay her to rest and begin their healing process. The Mitchell family, who had lived with uncertainty for over 30 years, expressed their gratitude to Catherine and the Foundation. "We watched the Thornton case unfold on the news," Sandra's brother told reporters. "We saw what that family endured for 20 years, and it gave us the courage to keep hoping, to keep searching for answers about Sandra." This pattern repeated throughout early 2025, as cold cases across New England yielded to techniques refined through the Thornton investigation. Each resolution brought a mixture of grief and relief to long-suffering families, and each reinforced the value of persistence in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. In March 2025, Catherine received an invitation that both honored Eliza's legacy and marked how far the Foundation's influence had spread. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit requested her participation in developing national standards for missing persons investigations, particularly those involving suspected foul play. "Your experience, both personal and professional, provides insights that no amount of academic study or field experience can replicate," the invitation read. "The tragic circumstances of your daughter's case and your family's 20-year journey for answers have already changed how we approach these investigations. We believe your direct input could save lives and bring swifter resolution to families currently living in limbo." Catherine accepted, traveling to Quantico, Virginia, where she spent 2 weeks working with FBI specialists. The resulting guidelines, incorporating both technical investigative methods and compassionate family engagement practices, were scheduled for implementation across all FBI field offices by the end of the year. Upon her return to Connecticut, Catherine found the foundation and center operating smoothly under the leadership of her dedicated staff. For the first time in 25 years, she allowed herself to step back slightly, to delegate more responsibilities, to acknowledge the toll that constant advocacy had taken on her health and well-being. William and I gave everything we had to finding Eliza and then to building her legacy, she confided to Martinez during a quiet lunch. I don't regret a single day of it, but I'm beginning to understand that the work will continue even if I slow down. The foundation is bigger than me now, bigger than any one person. It's what Eliza deserves. As October 2025 approached, marking 25 years since Eliza's disappearance, Catherine focused on planning a memorial that would honor not just her daughter, but all missing persons and their families. Rather than the somber candlelight vigils of past anniversaries, she envisioned a day that would celebrate resilience, progress, and hope. The event, held at the University of Connecticut campus, where Eliza had once studied, drew thousands. Families of missing persons from across the country gathered alongside law enforcement officers, forensic specialists, healthcare providers, and community members. White roses, Eliza's favorite, adorned every table and podium. Catherine, her silver hair gleaming in the autumn sunlight, addressed the crowd with the quiet strength that had carried her through 25 years of searching and building. A quarter-century ago today, my daughter Eliza set out for home and never arrived. That rainy night changed everything for our family and, eventually, for so many others. She gestured to the Eliza Thornton Center behind her, its modern glass facade reflecting the blue October sky. What began as one family's desperate search has grown into a movement that has transformed how we respond when someone goes missing, how we support those left behind, and how we use science and technology to find answers even decades later. Around the campus grounds, displays highlighted the Foundation's work, maps showing successful searches, photographs of reunited families, timelines of cold cases resolved through techniques developed after Eliza's case. In the center's main hall, a memorial wall honored those still missing and those found too late, a reminder of the human cost behind the statistics and protocols. Jamie Foster unveiled the first graduating class of specialized nurses trained to support families of missing persons. 20 young men and women wearing white coats with green ribbons, Eliza's favorite color. These nurses will carry forward Eliza's compassion, Jamie explained, her voice breaking slightly. They will be there for families at their darkest moments, offering not just medical care, but understanding and advocacy. Detective Martinez, now Captain Martinez, presented the latest statistics on missing persons cases in New England, noting the significant increase in successful resolutions since implementation of the Thornton protocols. 25 years ago, a missing college student was initially dismissed as a probable runaway, she said. Today, every missing persons report triggers an immediate coordinated response that assumes the worst while hoping for the best. As the formal presentations concluded, Catherine invited attendees to tie white ribbons on a memorial tree planted near the center's entrance. The simple act became a powerful symbol as thousands of ribbons fluttered in the breeze, each representing a missing person remembered, a family supported, a case resolved. At sunset, Catherine stood alone by the memorial tree, touching a ribbon bearing Eliza's name. After 25 years of public grief and advocacy, this private moment of reflection belonged to her alone. The vibrant young woman, with dreams of nursing, had been gone longer than she had been alive, yet her impact continued to grow. "We did it, Eliza," Catherine whispered to the evening air. "We found you. We found justice. And we built something that matters." She placed a white rose at the base of the tree, and walked slowly back toward the center that bore her daughter's name, her shoulders straight, her steps steady. The legacy of Eliza Thornton, the nursing student who never came home on a rainy October night in 2000, had evolved from a tragic mystery into a force for positive change. The systems that had failed her now used her story to save others. The community that had forgotten her now honored her memory through action and commitment. For the families still searching, still waiting for answers, the message was clear. No missing person would be dismissed. No case would be easily abandoned. And no family would face that devastating journey alone. As darkness fell over Connecticut on October 12, 2025, the Eliza Thornton Center remained illuminated, its lights a beacon visible for miles. Much like the Foundation's work had become a guiding light for missing persons cases across the nation. 25 years after a tragic loss, hope and determination had transformed personal grief into public good, creating a legacy that would continue to save lives and bring answers to families for generations to come. In a quiet corner of Waterbury, at Riverside Cemetery, a simple headstone marked where Eliza had finally been laid to rest. Engraved beneath her name and dates were the words that had guided her family's 20-year search and continued to inspire their work. Lost, but never forgotten. Loved without end. Justice delayed, but ultimately served. And beneath that, added after the case was finally resolved, her light continues to guide others home. The impact of the Eliza Thornton case continued to ripple outward through American society long after the 25th anniversary memorial. By early 2026, the Thornton protocols had been adopted by law enforcement agencies in 38 states, creating a standardized approach to missing persons investigations that prioritized immediate response and evidence preservation. In February 2026, those protocols faced their most public test when 16-year-old twins, Sophia and Samuel Chen, disappeared from a shopping mall in Portland, Maine. Security footage showed the teenagers leaving voluntarily with an unidentified man, leading some authorities to initially classify them as runaways rather than abductions. Catherine Thornton, watching the news unfold from her office at the center, immediately recognized the dangerous parallels to Eliza's case, the dismissive early response, the focus on the victim's voluntary departure rather than potential coercion or grooming. She picked up the phone and called the Portland Police Department directly. "I'm Catherine Thornton, from the Missing Persons Foundation in Connecticut," she told the detective who answered. "I understand you have 2 missing teenagers. Have you implemented the Thornton protocols yet?" There was a pause on the line. "Mrs. Thornton? The Eliza Thornton case? Yes, we're familiar with the protocols, but we have video of these kids walking out on their own. No signs of distress." Catherine's voice remained calm but firm. "My daughter Eliza got into her car voluntarily the night she disappeared. She drove away from campus without any visible coercion. That doesn't mean she wasn't being targeted or manipulated. The protocols exist precisely for cases like this, where the initial appearance might lead to dangerous assumptions. Her intervention proved crucial. The Portland police, recognizing Catherine's authority in the field, immediately elevated the case priority. They expanded the security footage search, discovering that the man had approached multiple teenage girls in the days before meeting the Chen twins. Digital forensics revealed he had been communicating with the twins through an anonymous messaging app for weeks, slowly building trust before suggesting they meet. Within 36 hours, an interstate task force located the man, a convicted sex offender who had failed to register after moving to Maine, and rescued the twins from a remote cabin in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Both teenagers were physically unharmed, but deeply traumatized by their ordeal. The Chen family later visited the Thornton Center to express their gratitude. "If not for your foundation and those protocols, our children might have been written off as runaways until it was too late," Samuel Chen Sr. told Catherine, his voice breaking. "How do you thank someone for saving your children's lives?" Catherine embraced the still-shaken parents. by supporting others when they need it, by speaking up when you see systems failing, by remembering that behind every missing person case is a family living their worst nightmare. The successful resolution of the Chen case brought renewed attention to the Foundation's work and highlighted the critical importance of the Thornton Protocols. A national news program featured an hour-long special on the evolution of missing persons investigations, tracing the path from Eliza's disappearance in 2000 to the sophisticated, coordinated response that saved the Chen twins in 2026. 26 years ago, a college student disappeared on a rainy night in Connecticut, the narrator intoned over footage of Route 8, where Eliza's car had been found. The dismissive initial response, the overlooked warning signs, the years of searching that followed, all became the catalyst for a revolution in how we handle missing persons cases today. The program included interviews with Catherine, Martinez, Jamie Foster, and others who had been part of Eliza's story. It showed the Foundation's volunteer teams training for search operations, the specialized nurses learning to support families in crisis, and researchers at the center analyzing patterns in predatory behavior. Most powerfully, it featured families who had benefited from these advances, parents reunited with children, siblings who had finally received answers about long-missing brothers or sisters, communities that had mobilized effectively when one of their own disappeared. The narrative was clear. Out of one family's unimaginable loss had come hope and help for countless others. In April 2026, Catherine received an invitation that represented perhaps the most significant recognition yet of her work. The President of the United States was establishing a national task force on missing persons and wanted Catherine to serve as a civilian advisor, bringing her unique perspective and experience to the federal level. The announcement came during a Rose Garden ceremony attended by families of missing persons from across the country. For too long, these cases have fallen through the cracks of our system, the President said, with Catherine standing nearby. Jurisdictional boundaries, resource limitations, and outdated approaches have left too many families waiting for answers, sometimes for decades. Today, we begin a new chapter in addressing this national crisis. The task force would coordinate resources across federal agencies, establish national standards based on the Thornton Protocols, create a unified database of missing persons cases, and provide grants to local law enforcement for specialized training and equipment. Catherine would help shape its priorities and ensure that the family's perspectives remained central to its work. As she accepted the appointment, Catherine reflected on the long journey from that rainy October night in 2000 to the White House lawn in 2026. My daughter Eliza was studying to become a nurse because she wanted to help others in their time of need, she told the assembled crowd. She never got that chance. But through this foundation, through these protocols, through every family reunited and every case resolved, her desire to help continues. This task force will extend that legacy to every corner of our nation. Back in Connecticut, the Foundation continued its daily work of supporting families, training volunteers, and advocating for missing persons. Jamie Foster's specialized nursing program graduated its second cohort, sending trained professionals to hospitals and crisis centers nationwide. The research team at the center published groundbreaking studies on the psychology of predatory behavior and the effectiveness of different search methodologies. In July 2026, Martinez, now approaching retirement herself, announced a special initiative within the state police, the Thornton Cold Case Unit, dedicated exclusively to re-examining unsolved disappearances using the latest forensic techniques and analytical methods. The unit would prioritize cases that had initially received inadequate investigation, particularly those involving young women and vulnerable populations. We've learned through Eliza's case that justice delayed need not be justice denied, Martinez explained at the press conference. With advances in DNA technology, digital forensics, and investigative methods, cases that seemed hopeless even 5 years ago may now be solvable. Every family deserves answers, no matter how much time has passed. The new unit quickly proved its value by resolving 3 cold cases within its first 6 months. In each instance, evidence preserved from the original investigations, often inadequate by modern standards but sufficient for advanced testing, provided the breakthrough that had eluded investigators for years. For Catherine, watching these developments from her position on the National Task Force, each success reinforced her belief in the work she had begun in the darkest days after Eliza's disappearance. What had started as one mother's desperate search for her daughter had evolved into a movement transforming how society responded to missing persons cases at every level. In October 2026, as the 26th anniversary of Eliza's disappearance approached, Catherine returned to Connecticut for a quieter commemoration than the previous year's major event. She visited Eliza's grave, placing white roses as she had done every year. She walked the halls of the center bearing her daughter's name, greeting researchers and students with the warm smile that had become her trademark, despite the grief that had shaped her life. During this visit, Catherine spent an afternoon with a small group of families newly facing the disappearance of loved ones. In a private meeting room at the center, away from cameras and reporters, she shared not the public story of the Foundation's successes, but the personal reality of living with unresolved loss. "There will be days when you can't get out of bed," she told them, her voice gentle but unflinching. "Days when you see someone who looks like your missing loved one and your heart stops. Days when well-meaning friends suggest it's time to move on or find closure, as if that were possible without answers." She looked around the circle, meeting each person's eyes. "I won't tell you the pain ever disappears completely. Even now, 26 years after Eliza vanished, there are moments when grief hits me with the same intensity as that first night. But I can tell you that you're not alone in this. And I can tell you that your love for the person you're searching for can become a force for change, for good, for helping others even in the midst of your own pain." That evening, Catherine visited Jamie Foster at her home near the university. The two women, bound by friendship forged in tragedy and strengthened through years of shared purpose, sat on Jamie's porch, watching the October sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Do you ever wonder what Eliza would think of all this?" Jamie asked, gesturing vaguely toward the university where the Thornton Center stood. "Of everything that's grown from what happened to her?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think she would be amazed," she finally replied, "and perhaps a little embarrassed by the attention. She never sought the spotlight. She just wanted to help people, to make their pain a little easier to bear." She smiled softly. "In that way, the Foundation is exactly what she would have wanted, even if the circumstances that created it are not." Jamie nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I still miss her. Even after all these years, I sometimes catch myself thinking, I need to tell Eliza about this, especially when I'm working with the nursing students." "I know," Catherine said, reaching over to squeeze her friend's hand. "That never really stops. But I've come to see those moments not as reminders of loss, but as evidence of how deeply she touched our lives. How could we not continue to include her in our thoughts, even now?" The next morning, Catherine met with Martinez at the State Police headquarters, reviewing the progress of the Thornton Cold Case Unit and discussing potential improvements to the protocols based on recent cases. Their working relationship had evolved over the years, from investigator and victim's family to colleagues, and finally to friends united by a common mission. "I never could have imagined this outcome when I first took over Eliza's case," Martinez admitted as they walked through the unit's offices, walls lined with case files and investigation boards. "I hope to find answers for your family, but all of this, the Foundation, the Center, the protocols, the National Task Force, it's extraordinary." Catherine smiled. "When you have nothing left but questions, you become very good at looking for answers. And when you discover that thousands of other families are asking the same questions, it becomes impossible not to try to change the system for all of them. As Catherine prepared to return to Washington for the task force's next meeting, she received a call that would add yet another dimension to Eliza's legacy. A producer from a major streaming service wanted to create a documentary series about the case and its far-reaching impact on missing persons investigations nationwide. "We don't want to focus just on the crime or the investigation," the producer explained. "We want to show how one family's tragedy became the catalyst for systemic change, how your work has saved lives and brought answers to so many others." Catherine agreed to participate with conditions. The series must respect Eliza's dignity, include the perspectives of other families of missing persons, and highlight the practical improvements in investigative techniques rather than sensationalizing the crime itself. Most importantly, it must serve as a resource for viewers who might be searching for missing loved ones themselves. The resulting 6-part series, Finding Eliza: From Tragedy to Transformation, premiered in January 2027 to critical acclaim and massive viewership. It traced the complete arc of the case, from the initial disappearance through the years of searching, the eventual discovery of Eliza's remains, the trial of her killers, and finally, the growth of the foundation and its impact on missing persons cases nationwide. What set the documentary apart was its unflinching examination of the systemic failures that had allowed Eliza's case to go unsolved for so long, balanced with a hopeful narrative about how those same systems were being reformed through the Thornton protocols and the Foundation's work. Viewers responded powerfully to the series, especially the final episode focusing on families who had found resolution through methods developed after Eliza's case. Social media filled with messages from people sharing their own experiences of missing loved ones, creating an unexpected community of support and understanding. More tangibly, the documentary prompted a surge in donations to the Foundation and applications for volunteer search teams across the country. Police academies reported increased interest in specialized missing persons investigation training. Universities reached out to the Thornton Center about establishing similar programs on their campuses. In March 2027, as Catherine testified before Congress on the need for increased federal funding for missing persons investigations, she referenced the documentary's impact. "When we share these stories, not as sensationalized crime entertainment, but as human experiences with real consequences, we change the conversation. We move from seeing missing persons cases as statistics to understanding them as ongoing emergencies affecting real families every day." The legislation she supported passed with bipartisan support, allocating significant resources to implementing the Thornton protocols nationwide and establishing regional cold case units modeled after Connecticut's successful program. For Catherine, this represented the culmination of nearly 3 decades of advocacy, moving from grassroots efforts to national policy. In May 2027, Catherine received an honorary doctorate from the University of Connecticut School of Nursing, the program Eliza had been studying in when she disappeared. Standing at the podium in her academic regalia, Catherine addressed the graduating nurses with a message that connected her daughter's interrupted journey to their beginning careers. Eliza chose nursing because she believed in easing suffering, in being present with people during their most vulnerable moments, Catherine told the graduates. Though she never completed this program, her compassion lives on through each of you. Whether you work in hospitals, clinics, schools, or crisis response, remember that your presence matters. Your care matters. You may never know the full impact of your work, but it ripples outward in ways you cannot imagine. After the ceremony, a young graduate approached Catherine with tears in her eyes. "I was one of the Chen twins," she said softly. "Sophia Chen. After we were rescued, I decided I wanted to help others the way your foundation helped us. That's why I became a nurse." Catherine embraced the young woman, her own eyes filling with tears. Here was living proof that Eliza's legacy continued to grow and evolve in unexpected ways. The daughter she had lost had inspired a foundation that saved two teenagers, one of whom now stood before her ready to carry that compassion forward to others in need. As summer turned to fall in 2027, Catherine began working on a book about her experiences, not just the search for Eliza and the criminal case, but the personal journey of transforming grief into purpose. She wanted to create a resource for other families facing similar tragedies, offering both practical guidance and emotional support. Writing proved to be both therapeutic and challenging, forcing Catherine to revisit the darkest moments of the past 27 years, while also recognizing how far she had come. She wrote about the night Eliza disappeared, the years of searching, the discovery of her remains, and the trial of her killers. But she also wrote about building the foundation, developing the protocols, and witnessing their impact on case after case across the country. Grief is not a straight line, she wrote in one passage. It doesn't progress neatly from denial to anger to bargaining to depression to acceptance. It circles back on itself. It ambushes you decades later. It transforms into something else entirely. Advocacy, purpose, connection with others who understand. You don't move past it. You move with it, allowing it to shape but not define you. In October 2027, as the 27th anniversary of Eliza's disappearance approached, Catherine received news that brought her journey full circle. The Thornton Cold Case Unit, using DNA techniques that hadn't existed even 5 years earlier, had identified remains found in a remote area of Rhode Island as belonging to Patricia Morgan, a young woman who had vanished from her college campus in 1998, 2 years before Eliza. The circumstances were strikingly similar. A female student disappearing at night, her car found abandoned, initial investigations focusing on boyfriends or voluntary departure rather than foul play. For years, Patricia's case had remained unsolved, her family living with the same questions that had haunted the Thorntons. When forensic examination of Patricia's remains revealed similarities to Eliza's case, including the pattern of injuries and the location relative to Major highways, investigators began exploring a disturbing possibility. Had Robert Blackwood been responsible for other murders before targeting Eliza? Further investigation uncovered evidence linking Blackwood to Patricia's disappearance, including records showing he had worked at a delivery service that regularly visited her campus during that period. When confronted in prison, Blackwood initially denied involvement, but eventually admitted to killing Patricia and 2 other women before Eliza, crimes that had remained unsolved for nearly 30 years. For Catherine, this revelation brought complex emotions. There was horror at the extent of Blackwood's crimes and grief for the additional families who had suffered. But there was also a sense of validation. The protocols and techniques developed after Eliza's case were now bringing answers to families who had been waiting even longer than the Thorntons had. She reached out personally to Patricia Morgan's parents, now in their 70s, offering not just condolences, but understanding that few others could provide. "I know what it's like to wait decades for answers," she told them during a quiet meeting at the foundation offices. "I know the particular pain of having hope renewed and crushed repeatedly over the years. And I know that even with answers, grief remains." The Morgans, like the Thorntons before them, channeled their pain into purpose, establishing a scholarship at Patricia's alma mater and joining the foundation's advocacy efforts. The pattern continued. Tragedy transformed into meaningful action, loss becoming a catalyst for change. As 2027 drew to a close, Catherine looked back on nearly 3 decades of work that had grown from a mother's desperate search into a movement reshaping how society responded to missing persons. The foundation she had built with William now had offices in 12 states. The protocols named for their daughter had become the national standard. The specialized nursing program Jamie had established was expanding to universities across the country. Most importantly, families who might once have faced dismissive authorities. Inadequate investigations and years of uncertainty were now met with immediate response. Thorough procedures and comprehensive support. Children who might have remained missing were found quickly. Cold cases that might have been forgotten were being solved through new techniques and renewed commitment. None of it could bring Eliza back. Nothing could restore the years lost to searching or erase the pain of what had happened on that rainy October night in 2000. But in the face of unimaginable loss, Catherine and William Thornton had built something that mattered, a legacy that honored their daughter by helping others in their darkest hours. Eliza wanted to be a nurse to ease suffering, Catherine often said when speaking to new volunteers or families just beginning their search. She never got that chance. But through this work, through all of you, her compassion continues to reach those who need it most. That's how we keep her memory alive, not just by remembering who she was, but by continuing what she would have done. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.